A major key to being really great at math is understanding how to work with percents, fractions, and decimals, and understanding the concept that percents, fractions, and decimals are all really different versions of the same numbers. And whichever one you're most comfortable working with, whether it's percents, fractions, or decimals, any number can be converted to be a percent, fraction, or decimal. And this is really going to help you out in math, understanding how to move between fractions, percents, and decimals, and rename numbers to be whatever category you want to work with. Let's start with a percent. If you're given the percent 16%, you're asked to find that number as a fraction or a decimal. Step one is always to recognize that when you're given something like 16%, percents are fractions. Percent meaning per 100, or out of 100. So 16% simply means 16 out of 100. That's already a fraction. The only issue with that is it's not in simplest form. Now, before you go ahead and try to find what 16 out of 100 is in simplest form, I would recommend writing 16% as a decimal. And a decimal is just like every number out there, every single working number. 1 is a decimal, it would be 1.0. Most decimals are going to be smaller than 1. The reason we like decimals is because it's the purest form of the number. 16% is really 16 out of 100. So conceptually, it's hard to compare to every other working number. A fraction, well, you're going to have to do some converting in your mind, but every decimal has a base. It is simply a base of 1. So every whole number, a decimal is like every other whole number, like the whole number 3, for instance, is a fraction. It's 3 over 1. But anytime you have a number over 1, that fraction sign meaning dividing, so it's like saying 3 divided by 1, well, we don't need to say that because of the identity property of division. 3 divided by 1 would be 3. Well, to find out 16/100ths as a decimal, and like I said, it's simplest to go straight from percents to decimals because you're just taking this and you're basically dividing it by 100 to get it to have a fraction of 1. And that's like every decimal and whole number. So whatever you do to one side, you must do to the rest. And so if you're dividing by 100, you need to divide 16 by 100. And 16 by 100 is really relatively simple. Because let's say this is your ones place. Your ones place. This is your tens place. All you're doing when you when you divide by 10 or 100 is you're just shifting on the place value. So 16 divided by 10 equals 1.6 because you're just shifting it to the right. You're just shifting it on the place value to make it 10 times smaller, but it's not 16 divided by 10, it's 16 divided by 100. So you have to shift it twice, and that would be 0.16. That seems pretty simple. 16/100ths, 16% is 0.16 as a decimal. Nothing too confusing there. Finding it as a fraction, remember, percents are already fractions. Percents are just fractions out of 100. So to go and find it as a fraction, well, you've already accomplished that task. It's just not what we call in simplest form. Why isn't it in simplest form? Well, both of them are even numbers, number one. So we can see they're both divisible by 2. And the question is, do they have a factor larger than 2 that we can divide both by? Well, I know 16 is divisible by 4. And 100 is also divisible by 4. So I'm going to start there. And let's just try to put in simplest form by dividing each side by 4. Whatever you do to one side, you must do to the rest. So that would be 4/25. And that can't be reduced anymore. So you didn't recognize that you could divide each side by 4, but you knew each was an even number. So you could divide each side by 2. You would have had 8/50ths, and then you would have recognized, oh, wait, I can still divide both by 2 again. And that would equal 4/25. And 16% is 4/25 as a fraction. Why would you want to work with 4/25ths instead of 16%? Well, sometimes to solve problems, it's going to be simpler to have a model. And whereas you can see 4 out of 25. It's a little simpler to comprehend than 16 out of 100. 0.16 is very beneficial too, and you will see with any calculator that you ever use, you're going to need to know how to convert numbers into decimals. And most equations will show, or most formulas will show numbers with decimals, even though we won't rely heavily on formulas. Let me give you the example number 2, and let's say they give you a fraction this time. Let's say they give you the fraction 1/5, and they're challenging you find 1/5 as a percent and as a decimal. This is a little bit more challenging. Remember, I said once you find the number as a percent, it's really simple to get it to a decimal, because then you're just dividing by 100. So our first objective is going to be to try and find 1/5 as a percent. We just, as I just mentioned before, percents meaning per 100 out of 100 are simply a fraction out of 100. So you can think about it as 1 out of every 5 is equal to how many out of 100? You could think 1 out of 5 would be, next would be, at that same rate, would be 2 out of 10, 3 out of 15, 4 out of 20, 5 out of 25. Because every time the denominator is increasing by a rate of 5, the numerator is increasing by a rate of 1. Well, there's a simpler way to do this, and you can recognize 5/25ths would go into 100 4 times, but there's even a simpler way to do that. And let's just keep counting to prove our point. 7 out of 35, 8 out of 40, 9 out of 45, 10 out of 50, 11 out of 55, 12 out of 60, and you can see how tedious this is. 13 out of 65, 14 out of 70, 15 out of 75, and it's very good chance I could make a mistake here. 17 out of 85, 18 out of 90, 19 out of, what did I just do? I meant to write 90. See, I'm losing my mind here. 19 out of 95 and 20 out of 100. There's a simpler way to do it. You could think, and here's the visual of it. 5 goes into 100. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Goes into 100 20 times. So you could have just recognized, let's shortcut it. The shortcut of that addition is multiplication. Let's just recognize 5 goes into 120 times. So let's just multiply it by 20. Whatever you do to one side, you must do to the rest. If we're multiplying the denominator by 20, we'll do the same thing to the numerator, and that will give us 20 out of 100. And that would be 20%. Very simple now to convert this number into a decimal. 20 out of 100, and decimals just are out of 1. So you see that trend. Percents are like fractions out of 100. Decimals are fractions out of 1. Divide by 100, and it's just shifting on the place value, and that would give you 0.2. And you could write 0.20, but no reason to, because that 0 in the hundredths place has no value. Same thing with the percent. When we write that percent sign, people automatically recognize that that means 20 out of 100. That's what percent means. Same thing with the decimal. You don't need to write 0.2 out of 1. You just call that 0.2. People automatically recognize that is out of 1. It's 0.2 for every 1. For this last example, make the eraser a little bit bigger so I can speed up this process. Hopefully you're catching on to the concept now. And this will be very beneficial as you start to solve more challenging math problems, and you can choose which method you want to solve it in, percents, fractions, or decimals. They're all the same. This is called making numbers work for you. It's a key to being very good at math. For this last example, I'm going to give you a decimal, 0.7, and now you have to solve for the percent and the fraction. Well, as I mentioned before, we recognize 0.7 is like 0.7 out of 1. We know that percents are out of 100, so we're going to go from the decimal and find it as a percent. Percents are out of 100, so it's like multiplying by 100. Shifting on the place value, but now we're getting bigger. So 0.7 times 10 equals 7. 0.7 times 100, you have to shift now twice. So this becomes a 7, and then that's times 10. Multiply by 100, and that equals 70. So, as a percent, 0.7 is 70%. To find that as a fraction, well, you found it as a fraction already. And you did. 70/100 is a fraction. All you need to do is find it in simplest form. Now, both numbers end in a 0, so you should automatically recognize they're both divisible by 10. So let's divide each side by 10. Whatever you do to one side, you must do to the rest. And that would be 7/10. 7's a prime number, so you know we can't reduce this anymore. And as a fraction, that's 7/10. That concludes the lesson today. Hopefully you have a very good background about converting between percents, fractions, and decimals.